Should you do a test knit? In the words of famous 11th century French philosopher Peter Abelard, yes and no. My name is Nicola and I recently participated in my first test knit, and today I'm here to tell you everything that I've learned about test knitting during this test and in the run up to it, because I did some extensive researching before I signed on to it, and to tell you stuff that might help you avoid common pitfalls of test knitting. So before we get into it, I do want to say that I did tag this video as an ad because I received the pattern for the sweater for free in exchange for testing the pattern and seeing if there's any mistakes in it, not in exchange for reviewing it or posting about it or anything. I was not required to do this at all. So you're getting my fully unfiltered and honest thoughts about this pattern at the end of the video. But yeah, I thought better safe than sorry, and transparency is super important to me, so that's why the tag. Let's start with the positives about test knitting, because there is quite a few. So as I said, for my first test knit, I chose The Harvester Sweater by Jennifer Steingass. Jennifer posted on Ravelry a few weeks back looking for test knitters for this pattern. There was a little photograph provided in the thread that showed what the yoke would look like, and I just fell in love with this feather design immediately. And having thought about doing a test knit for months, I knew that this would be the one I would apply for, and I did in the end get picked, and I did get to knit this. So about the actual test knit, I cannot say anything negative because it was amazing. It was really meticulously organized. Jennifer had a moderator take care of like the threads as well, Lucy, and she also sent pattern updates regularly. The pattern was in itself already quite well written when it arrived at the test knitters, so there were only very minor mistakes in it. The community was very supportive. It was really nice to be part of this group of test knitters who kept updating, posting pictures of how they were getting on with it, and that all of that was just super nice. Also, I had previously knit some of Jennifer's patterns, so I already kind of knew what to expect and how the pattern would read and what to pay attention to. So from all of that, it just worked so well. It was a really positive experience for me to participate in this test knit. Now, that does not mean that every test knit is like that. And before I signed on to this, I did research quite a bit to see if test knitting was for me or not. And I did find quite a few negative points about test knitting, so let's talk about those. Now, let me grab my mulled apple juice. I do not have the tea, but I do have the mulled apple juice, which is kind of the German non-alcoholic alternative to mulled wine for when you still have plans later in the day and you do not want to get drunk before that. So let's get into the not so rosy side of test knitting. First of all, if you do not like deadlines, you won't like test knitting in general, because the deadlines are usually quite tight. I did pay attention to a few other test calls from designers I really like before I decided to apply for this one, and through the bank a lot of the time it's not like it's super rushed. I feel like designers have kind of a good feel for how long it takes knitters to make something, but it's on the faster side of normal. So I think for the sweater we had less than 4 weeks to finish the test knit. I will put a comment below if that's inaccurate. And this is a DK weight sweater, so that's quite fast, especially in a season that has lots of holidays in it. So that's something to really do keep in mind, because I got lucky. If you watched my recent videos, you know I broke my toe, so I was kind of like sofa bound for quite a while, and I did not have anything else to do during that time, so I did knit on this quite a lot, so I got into it quite quickly. But I suspect I would have been rushing if that hadn't happened. If I just had my normal daily activities and then this test knit on top, then it might have been a tiny bit rushed. So that's something to keep in mind. Additionally, because the designers need feedback on the required yardage or meterage of yarn, and also you're presumably going to take pictures of your finished sweater and put it on Ravelry, a lot of designers have quite strict rules about modifications and what's allowed and what's not allowed when you're testing their pattern. And for example, in this case, bigger modifications would have needed approval. And I fully understand that, because that makes complete sense. Because if you're a designer, it's really hard to figure out how many meters a specific size of your pattern needs if the test knitter decides to put balloon sleeves on it. Like, how are you ever going to figure that out? In my case, I have quite an hourglass figure, so I usually include waist shaping whenever I knit a sweater. And if the pattern does not include waist shaping, I know enough to just include it myself and make it up on the go. Like, I just improvise it a bit. This pattern did not include waist shaping, and because there would definitely have been one of the bigger modifications that would have needed approval, I did not ask for it, and that's perfectly on me. I could just have asked, but I thought it's also nicer to just follow the pattern, because you're trying to work out if it works or if there are any mistakes in it. So I knitted according to the pattern specifications, and I made the sleeves a little bit longer so it would also fit my husband, because it now kind of goes straight down without waist shaping, and it does, and it looks really nice. So there's that. But yeah, just if you have a like non-standard body shape or some design features that you always like to incorporate when you knit something, then be aware that it might not just be possible when you're doing a test knit. Third, of course, since you're knitting this pattern as a test, there might be errors in it. And I have to say I got really lucky, as I already said, but I know that for other test knits, the errors can be quite intense. I've seen a few threads on Ravelry where the pattern was basically not functional in the way it was written. That does not apply to Jennifer Steingass's patterns at all, as far as I've seen, but some other designers out there, it's a little bit wild. And usually if you knit a finished published pattern from Ravelry, then you do have the community available a little bit more, because other people have knitted, so you can go through the project and you can see if someone has made comments on it, if someone has maybe said, oh, there's a error in row 23 of chart B, and that means that my stitch count is completely off. Hallelujah, because I was wondering what I did wrong. When you're test knitting, it's kind of uncharted territory, and you're a tiny bit more on your own. You can, of course, post in a thread if you notice a mistake, but I don't know if you'll get quick support. Depends completely on the designer, so up to them. Then, of course, not just errors, but some patterns are just also not written very well or very clearly, so it can be difficult to figure out what the designer meant, and you might be wondering if it's your fault and if it's your mistake, and that can, I gather, also not be such a pleasant experience. And then there's the designer drama on top of that. Excuse me, I had to get up and grab this because he was mowing in front of the door. He's being, as we say in German, a little mecha pot, a complaint pot. He's just making noise and being unruly. Well, now he's taking off. But yes, you heard me right. I have a few designers who I follow on Instagram, and some of the stuff I've seen is just really not cool. Like, I assume that if you sign on for a test knit, then you do have every intention to finish the pattern that you signed on for. And some people are really bad at kind of figuring out how much time they have and stuff like that. So not everyone is going to finish. There can also be like sudden like situations that pop up, and some designers have just taken to blasting the test knitters that haven't finished their patterns on Instagram, where some of them have like thousands of followers with their full name, stuff like that. And I don't know, I just know that I will not sign up for a test knit for any of the designers that have done this in the past, because that's just really not something that I'm looking for in my life, that amount of stress. I just do not need. So I already told you that I had quite a good experience with this test knit, especially it being my first, and I kind of knew that I would, because I did some things ahead of time to make sure that I would avoid these pitfalls. And the way I did this was I went on Ravelry and I checked designs by the designers I was considering test knitting for and looked at their clarity ratings. So especially if people have already published quite a few designs, then you can see that lots of people who have knit their projects left clarity ratings on the pattern page. And I will only consider test knitting for a designer whose clarity ratings on the projects are through the bank above like 4.4 out of 5 roughly, because anything else means for me that the pattern has glaring issues even in its publicated state, and I do not want to know what that pattern was like in the test knitting stage before the test knitters test knitted. So checking the clarity rating for me is the first thing I do. And there was one designer who I've knit patterns from before and who I like, because I really like the outcome of the sweatshirt designs that she does, that had a few designs with a clarity rating of 3.4 or 3.5. This is quite a popular designer as well, but for me that means I'm not spending weeks of my knitting time knitting that person's pattern as a test, which is not paid usually, apart from you're getting the pattern for free after testing it, if I can expect something like that to happen potentially. That was the first thing that I did. The second thing is going to be super controversial, but it actually helps me quite a ton. So you know how the knitting community is usually really friendly, people are nice and people are very polite, and sometimes they mince their words a little bit. There's one place on the internet where that is really not the case at all, and that is Reddit Craftsnark. So you've probably heard about Reddit because it's one of the biggest social media platforms in the world, but if you haven't, it is in itself quite a mixed bag. It is split into hundreds and hundreds and thousands of different small forums that are basically like notice boards, and each notice board deals with specific topics. And there's one that's called Craftsnark, where people go to snark about things that bother them in regards to their craft. For example, sewing, knitting, anything really. There are quite long rants about specific designers, patterns, yarn companies, or anything like that, YouTubers. And it's not the most positive space on the internet, but I do sometimes really like how refreshingly honest most of the posts are, and a lot of things that people address up there, they kind of bother me too, so I do like to read Reddit Craftsnark sometimes. And what I did before signing up to this test knit was to search Reddit Craftsnark for the names of the designers that I was considering doing a test knit for, and then reading through the results and seeing if there were any completely red flags for me. And in this case, I did not find any. For other designers, I did. So that really put me off some test knits, and I would recommend that if you are considering test knitting for a designer, then just give it a little bit of a read through, because some of the things on there are kind of a little bit eye-opening. So yeah, Reddit Craftsnark saved me a lot of time and grief by just being able to look for specific designers, found out about the designers who like named and shamed test knitters who couldn't finish the test knit on there. That's just stress I don't need in my life. And for that, it was really, really good. And I'm very grateful to the people on there for posting their honest opinions about stuff. Another thing that helped me was to be really realistic about my deadline. I knew a sweater test was a big undertaking for a first test knit, and I knew I did not have so many appointments the next weeks, so that's why I took it on and I managed. But it would have been really miserable experience if I had picked something with an even shorter deadline, or like a more complicated sweater or something like that. And that's not great, because I do have really I don't know, I feel like quite obligated. If I sign on for something like that, I'll finish it and I'll do it, and I stick to my word and I see it through, almost no matter what. Like, something would have had to seriously go more wrong than a broken toe or something like that for me to stop finishing the sweater. So it was really good that I was kind of upfront with myself before I started on how much time I would have and how much time this would need. Another thing that I decided is, if I would do another test knit, I would definitely also use yarn again that can be frogged easily. I used Malabrigo Rios for this one, and if I had been really unhappy with the finished object, then I could just have ripped it out and reused the yarn. I see people do test knits in Nutiden, for example, or other unspun yarns, and I really admire them. But if I think about the pattern being maybe not exactly what I was looking for, and then having to rip that out with the yarn ripping every few meters, I would have cried. So that's another very specific but hopefully useful tip that I would take into account. So to break it down even further, like, I think the things that should really stop you doing a test knit are lack of time, getting a weird vibe from the designer for whatever reason, and also you just being not in love with the pattern. Sometimes I almost feel like, because everything is so fast nowadays, it generates that feeling of needing something when you actually don't, and it can be quite hard to differentiate between genuinely wanting a specific sweater or getting kind of caught up in the hype of seeing a test thread in time to actually reply to it and potentially get picked, and seeing other people have already been like applying for it and stuff like that. And yeah, keeping those two things separate, quite important, quite hard to do, but probably will make your test knits more fun if you manage. One thing that I think should not stop you from test knitting is if you're relatively new at knitting and a beginner. I would not test knit a pattern that would require me to do a new technique that I haven't tried before, because that just sounds too stressful for me and I wouldn't enjoy that. But I feel like if I was a designer, I would almost appreciate having a few people in this test knit who are not the absolute knitting pros with 25 years of knitting experience under their belts, because you do kind of get this, as we say in German, Berufsblindheit, where it's like you're blind to some mistakes because you've done something so often that you don't even notice and you just overlook stuff. So I feel like a pair of more fresh eyes on a pattern can actually be super beneficial. And I think if you see something that you think you can technically do, like from the technical perspective, and you're really interested in doing it, then you should still just shoot your shot and apply for a test knit, even if there are other people who have done more technical knits before. But yeah, really don't do it like 2-color brioche test knit if you've not done that before, something like that. Just take things slow. So keeping all of that in mind, would I test knit again? It depends. Yes, I think, actually. So I would definitely test knit for Jennifer Steingass again. I was really happy with how this test knit was run, and the communication was really good. Pattern updates came speedily whenever someone did find a minor mistake, and overall it was a really good experience. But I would only test knit patterns that I'm genuinely really excited about. So if I see something where I know I will probably buy this pattern anyway when it releases because I really want to make the object, then for me that's a way to get the pattern a little bit earlier and you get started on it a bit faster. And if the designer is quite established and has really high clarity ratings on their other designs on Ravelry, then I know probably there's not going to be anything too groundbreaking in there that's going to completely ruin my knitting experience. So under these circumstances, yes, I would knit a test knit again. one thing I also briefly wanted to point out is if you do consider doing a test knit, please read the instructions. I have mostly been talking the whole video from a knitter's perspective and looking at it from my viewpoint as a test knitter, but as an empathetic person, it kind of baffled me how many people did not follow basic instructions or did not read the description of the pattern or stuff like that. Like, the whole thread is on Ravelry, so you can have a look if you want to, but like when the testnet was full, the title of the testnet was updated to full testnet. People kept posting for a week after being like, I would like to do this testnet. The first sentence of the testnet thing is, this testnet is full. I don't know. We were like asked to only post modeled pictures of the sweater on the day that it was actually released, which I can fully understand because you kind of want that excitement of a release day, right? And so many people posted before that anyway. And despite multiple reminders on Ravelry, via email, I think, yeah, if you read instructions well, then that's already a huge plus point. And if you don't, please really try. Before we wrap up here, let's talk about the actual pattern, and let me give you a little bit of a pattern review, because not only have I knit this, but also because I was part of this test knitting group, I've read 42 pages of Ravelry threads about this pattern with people pointing stuff out to me. So, hi Pippin, he's mowing in the background. I hope it's not too loud. Can you not? Sir, can you... Things I really liked about this pattern is that it is very clearly written. I always find Jennifer's patterns really easy to follow. I think her sweater, one of her sweaters, was my very first sweater that I knit in colorwork. Might have been my second one after the Tinker knit one, but it was one of my very first sweaters I knit. I did not have any issues with it even as a beginner knitter, and I still think that her patterns are some of the clearest patterns you can find for knitting colorwork sweaters on Ravelry. The design is also really versatile. I saw so many pictures on Ravelry that looked so different depending on the color choices that people made. There were some really wintry versions using red and white, for example. There were some very autumny versions like mine, and there were also some gorgeous low contrast colorwork versions that were so stunning. It really blew my mind. There was someone who knit this sweater in a yarn from Sestring Grin, I think, that was really light pink, just dusty pink and grey and white, and it was so pretty that I am now making something with a similar color combo because I felt so inspired by it. Something I also liked about this pattern and about lots of Jennifer's patterns in general is how size inclusive they are. This pattern, for example, came in a size range from like bust circumference of 36 inches or 91.5 centimeters to 67.5 inches or 171 centimeters. So there's quite a big range in there, and I think that's great because it will allow knitters of all body shapes and sizes to have fun with the sweater. Now, because I was in those threads so much and I kept reading, there were a few things that people pointed out that I then also noticed a little bit about the patterns, but they're quite minor. So something I noticed is that my yoke puckers a tiny bit in the upper feathers here and there. Blocking helped it, but it not completely fixed the issue. I don't know if that's an issue with the kind of yarn I picked, because I also saw lots and lots of project pictures of projects that did not have this issue at all. So the other test knitters who have this and me, we might have done something like pick a specific kind of yarn. Maybe it's because we have superwash yarn, I don't know, or done the increases a little bit too tight causing this. But yeah, that's if you're bothered by stuff like that, that's a tiny bit potentially of an issue. I wonder if a different kind of increase could avoid this. Something that I also noticed is that you have to be a little bit careful with where you carry your floats. So carrying your floats in color work means that you catch your contrasting thread behind your main color thread every few stitches, so that there's no long loops of loose thread in the back of your colorwork knitting. And lots of people do this whenever they have a stretch of more than 5 or 6 stitches of the main color going on. I do this, in fact I'm quite meticulous about it, even though I find it very annoying, because it's just, you have to be careful that you don't catch your floats in the same spot every row, because then your contrast color can shine through. I noticed that if you catch your float in the row above where an increase will be in the next row, then that can also happen, and that's not the look I was going for this. So if you're knitting this, just pay attention to where you're catching your floats. I realized through reading this thread that lots of people do not catch their floats at all. That was kind of groundbreaking for me, because I always learned that you have to do it, but apparently lots of people don't. I can imagine that works better with more rustic yarns that kind of rub together in the back a bit and then felt up a tiny bit. But yeah, that is apparently also an option that might make it easier. But you can see that the longest stretches are quite long here, so I don't know, it just didn't seem like an option to me, but it was really interesting learning that it actually is. Overall, I'm quite happy with the project that I came out with, but I also have one confession to make, and that is, I think I'm slowly falling out of love with Malabrigo Rios. Malabrigo Rios was one of my first big yarn loves when I started knitting again after my, I don't know, 20-year long knitting hiatus. And the first months or year of me knitting again, it was like this really high class, amazing yarn for me, where I was like, oh, one day when I'm good enough, I'm going to make a whole sweater from this yarn. And now I am, and now I did, and I did before again already. And what I have noticed is that this yarn, Pippin, I don't know if you can hear him, but he's quite angry, because I'm talking to the camera, not to him, and he doesn't like it. So what I've noticed about Malabrigo Rios is that it stretches so much when it gets wet, at least for me. I think maybe that's also because I tend to have a little bit of a loose gauge, but it stretches so much. It's like a whole different garment that comes out of the wash, no matter if you hand wash it or if you machine wash it. It's just incredible in not a great way, and it also snaps back, but I find it really stressful to trust that process. And at least for me, I've had to put it in the dryer for short spells of time before to get it to snap back. If I just let it air dry, it doesn't fully. And every time I put my Malabrigo Rios sweaters in the wash, I get a little bit anxious. Then maybe this time they won't snap back, or maybe I'll have to put them in the dryer for a bit again. And then, as I told you like a few videos ago, I have one that kind of weirdly felt it, even though it's superwash from the dryer. After having already been in the dryer a few times, it seems like some sort of layer on the superwash yarn wore down over time. So there's that. So now, I do have to say about the fit of the sweater that I find it's not the most flattering shape for my body shape, because, as I said, it goes quite straight down without waist shaping, and because I am a little bit hourglassy and round, it just emphasizes my widest bits, which is not the best look for me, as you can kind of see in this shot of me trying to balance on a wall on a still half broken toe, which was a bad idea, and Matt told me off for it instantly. But I still like it. I still think it's really pretty on me, and it looks great on Matt as well, so that's really, really nice. I would knit the sweater again, and in fact I might knit the sweater again if I have time, and I'm really glad that I had this test knitting opportunity. So should you do a test knit? I would say ultimately it's a personal decision based on your time, interests, and your knitting goals. I hope my experience helps you decide a little bit. And if you've tested it before, I would love to hear from you in the comments about your experience, and hopefully can also be helpful to the rest of this little tiny internet community. I hope to see you very soon. If you haven't yet, but you're still watching this video, then consider to subscribe. And yeah, I'll see you very soon. For an outro to this video, please enjoy this shot of me trying to take an artsy picture of the sweater with a little lantern that turned out really badly. I hope that brightens your day a bit. Bye bye!
You genuinely cannot tell that there's a light in it.
There's a light in it.
I know, but I can hardly tell from here.